Hi, today we're going to talk about the journey I've gone through for my Xlights and my RGB adventure. We're going to go over a lot of the tools that I've bought, and we're going to go into a discussion on wiring, since that seems to be a hot topic for all the newbies. Questions asked like, how do I wire, what do I put them together with, things like that. Hopefully this video will help you understand a little about what I've gone through in this journey, and it'll help you on your journey. Okay, we're going to go over some of the tools I've gotten over the years in doing this hobby, and some of them I've had before. The first set of pliers are crimping pliers for Scotch locks. The second are some strippers that are used to strip wire and also do crimp-on connectors. These are just a set of flat lockjaw pliers. You get them anywhere. Some Klein strippers that are used for house, but I want to show you how I've used those. These are Klein wire strippers that are used quite extensively in this hobby. These are crimpers for using network cables, for making those up. A set of lockjaw pliers, water pump pliers, channel locks, whatever you want to call them. A set of dikes or cross cuts, and these are Klein close cut pliers. You're going to need those when you start doing network cables. Over here I've got two different hot air guns. This one's good for larger heat shrink. This one's good for doing heat shrink connectors. This one will literally burn the wire in half, so if you have one of these, be careful with it. Notice I do have a lighter. I'm going to show you how to use that, just a typical barbecue lighter. Over here I have a Weller solder gun. This is solder paste or flux and solder from Amazon. All these things will have links later on. I also have a Weller battery operated soldering gun, which I'll use. And finally, the last soldering gun I have is this Weller. This is kind of my secondary or go-to. This one is my primary, but I like this one a lot too. When you're going to do network cables, go ahead and spend the money. Get one of these cable testers. They're available on Amazon. They're very cheap. Also, make sure you get yourself a multimeter. This one I got a long time ago on Amazon. The colors change, but this one works perfectly for the hobby. You're going to need something to hold the wires. This is I guess it's called a third hand. I don't really like it, but I did get it. There are other ones. I bought this one. It was relatively cheap. So I don't use it as much as I use my homemade wire holder. Again, it's just gator clips and with some 16-penny nails pounded into the wood from the backside, and the gator clips literally just set on the nails. So that's the one I use most. These are some of the different connectors we're going to talk about today, some of the different wire that we're going to talk about today. And this is just a simple kit I got to hold all my connectors. You can get those anywhere. I'm sure they're also available on Amazon. I've had these for 20 years. Since today we're talking about all things wiring, I'm going to go through the wire that I've used throughout my journey, and hopefully it'll help you with yours. I've got multiple cable types here. First, network wire. We're going to get to that in a minute. I've had great luck with this Max Bright LED on Amazon. It's quite reasonably priced and works great. It's pre-bound. And I've also had great luck with this SJTOW cable 18.5. 18.5 means it has 5 conductors inside. I forgot to mention earlier that you're going to need a good utility knife throughout your journey. So you just, on this cable, you have to score it and then just snap it off to get it out of the way. And you expose those 5 wires. You're probably thinking, why do I need 5 wires? Well, 3 wires run the LED pixels, right? And these other 2 can be used for power injection. So in one cable, you can run your LED and your power injection if you're running high density props. I run a lot of high density props and I power inject, so this is the cable of choice that I found that works good for me. Here's the same light bright cable, LED cable, but it's in white. And this is what we're going to use for today's demo rather than wasting pixels and or pigtails. It's the same size wire, so let's get to it. So these are the couple of the wire strippers that I use. This one's a Klein. Again, I got it on Amazon. It's got a wire cutter here in the center. It also has jaws up here at the top, and I'm going to show you how to use it in a second. It also has an adjuster that you can set the length of the stripped wire you're going to have, and you just turn that down right there. This adjusts the strength of the jaws against the wire, so when it strips, it works very well. Over to the left here is wire strippers. Again, I got these off Amazon. These are wire strippers right here and cutters right here. These are used for network cable, and the good thing about these is it shows right here what your wiring should be in your connector. If you look right there, you have A or B. You can use either of those when doing network cables, but if you follow that precisely, it'll get you what you need for network cables. Up here is the crimper and the cutter. I'll show you later how these are used. These are the Klein cutters and wire strippers. I'll show you how to use the cutter. Literally just cut the wire, no problem. The way the strippers work, again, they use jaws, and you lay your wire in it. You put whatever length you want on it, and as it comes down, the jaws come down against the wire, and it literally just strips the wire off. The other part of it that strip is if you're going to strip for hooking up connectors or hooking up LED wire, you just put it in there and you can see it's perfect length every time. So that's how you're going to set your cutters and your strippers for hooking up pigtails or connecting your wire to different extensions and so forth. So these are the Kleins, and that's how you use them. These are the network cable crimpers I talked about earlier, or showed you earlier. On the back here is the cutter. You'll literally just put it in and zip it off. It does ratchet down on the wire and cuts it. You can see it almost cut through it, but it didn't cut completely because I wasn't on the right slot. There's two slots here. One cuts short and one cuts all the way through. So make sure you use the right one if you're going to cut the wire off. You can see there it cuts it off. The other thing it does is it strips the casing off the wire so you can make the cables up. This circular portion right here, there's a razor blade in there, so you literally just put your cable through it, you crimp down, and you spin your wire in it, and it cuts the wire jacket off for you so that you can then expose the twisted pair cables. I'll show you in a second how you use the crimper to attach the end. I mentioned earlier about twisted pair. You of course have to untwist each pair because you're going to insert them a single wire at a time in each connector. So just make sure you untwist them and try and get as many of the kinks out as you can by running your hand across them. And that'll get them as straight as you need. What we're using today is through connectors. Now some people like through connectors, some don't. I personally found that the through connectors work well. I've made up non-through connectors and through connectors. If you're used to using non-through connectors, there is another crimper that you use that doesn't cut the wires off. These crimpers cut the wires off for the through connectors. So I'm going to show you how those work in just a second. Let me take a minute and insert the wires into the connector, and I'll be right back. Okay, these are the through wires. Like I mentioned, either through wire connectors. I originally used the non-through wire connectors when I wired cameras in my house. They were such a pain in the butt, I decided to go with through connectors. Again, I got these off Amazon. Once you put all those little tiny wires through those little holes in the right order that's indicated on the cutter, you may need a set of pliers to grab them and pull them through and get them to a point that they're in the right position. And once they're in the right position, as those are, you literally, I take these close cutters first and get rid of the excess. These are the close cutters from Klein I talked about earlier. And then I just push them together a little bit. Notice the tab here on the cutter and crimper is where it goes into the plier. So literally you put the wires through. It's going to go all the way in. It's going to go all the way in like that. You can see a little bit of the wire sticking out the other side. Once you do, you just crimp down on it and give it one last cut. Notice it didn't cut all the wires. That's why you use the close cut, so you can cut them off yourself if they don't cut. And there you have a perfect network connection that you can use in your light show. Now this wire is 16E. It has larger wire. If you use a Cat 5 cable, the Cat 5 cable has a smaller diameter wire. It'll go in the holes much easier, but also it might tend to jump across the holes as you put them through. So make sure you look at the wires when they come out of the hole and they match the wiring diagram as you used on the crimpers. Remember I talked about making network cables for my cameras? One thing that I got after about a week of having trouble with cables is this network cable tester. Got it on Amazon. Literally, it comes with instructions inside the box. You can read them if you want. Literally, all you do is plug the wires in. So the two of them basically go in the jacks. They'll click in place just like they would on any network cable. And then literally you just turn the button on to on. And notice it goes through and reads every wire to make sure there's continuity, that they're wired correctly. And it goes through that a few times until you shut it off. So it's a good idea to get one of these if you're going to make network cables. Network cables are, I know they're cheap to purchase on Amazon or from one of the big box stores, but you may want to make them yourself for special lengths. So make sure you get yourself a network cable tester. It'll help you in the long run. Sometimes when you have a pixel go out in the yard, you have to replace it on the fly or as quickly as possible. A lot of people like to use these Scotch locks. They're grease-filled wire joining connectors, and literally to use them, you literally just put the wire in one side. You got to make sure on the back that you push the wire all the way in. I'm just going to put one piece of wire in this so I can show you. And you can either use Scotch lock pliers or just square jawed pliers, either one. I happen to have Scotch lock pliers, and you just literally push down on it, and that joins those wires together. So this is just a different size. It's only 2 wire. There's some of the grease from inside got on my hand. Again, you're going to put the wire in it. You're going to make sure it goes all the way to the bottom on both sides. So again, this is a single wire connector. It's not multiple. But again, Scotch lock pliers, and just push down on them. These were used in the telephone industry, but they work fine with LEDs. So they do make a small cut in the wire, but some people say that they're bad, some say they're good. You make the decision if you want to use them in your show or not. By the way, 3M does make a 3-wire connector. They sell for 25 of them sell for about $50 on Amazon. They are also grease filled, and they also use the Scotch lock pliers, so you can do all 3 wires at the same time through one connector. Another way to make repairs in the field to your RGBs are these Xlights. They're from Xlights. They call it click it because they click when you close. You literally just lift them up and insert your wires from your pixels or your connectors or whatever, your pigtails. They slide all the way in and they'll bottom out. So once they bottom out, make sure they're in place. Take slip jaw pliers like these and click down, and you'll feel them click. You'll feel them snap shut, and that tells you they're connected. What happens is inside there's a metal piercing element in there that goes into the wire that connects them, and there's a bus bar that goes from one side to the other. So literally, it connects your wires simple and easy. You can make a repair in 3 or 4 minutes. So these are Xlights from Xlights. Matos also has them, and then also the Scotch Locks has 3-wire grease-filled connectors. So these are other options for connecting your wire. Another way you can make repairs in your yard if pixels go out are heat shrink tubes. These heat shrink tubes have solder instead of, they're also known as solder sleeves. You literally have to strip your wire back and just insert it into the sleeve, which sometimes is hard for me, but we'll put it in there. Insert your 2 wires and they'll cross each other in the center over the solder. Once they cross, you literally can use a air gun. I like using a barbecue lighter because the barbecue lighter will cause the heat shrink to go down. And if you hold it for about 7 seconds, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, the solder will turn a bright silver, which means it's done its job of adhering the 2 wires together, and now you've completely joined those together. Let it cool off and you've got a solder joint that is now waterproof, and your wires should be ready to run. Another way to use solder sleeves is using a heat gun. This is a low wattage heat gun. If you use a high wattage heat gun, you tend to melt the wires and basically ruin them. So make sure you use a low wattage heat gun so it doesn't cause damage to what you're doing. Also, the way I use this is I do the heat shrink ends first, so you're going to see that in a moment, and then the solder. The solder takes about 12 seconds to melt with a heat gun, at least with this heat gun. Yours may vary. Don't overheat the wires. Make sure you do the heat shrink end first and then do the solder in the center. If you get too much heat on these wires, it will force ruin them. Okay, you might not have seen it, but the solder did melt and it did join the wires together. So now you have a watertight solder joint to make sure that your wires are waterproof and your pixels work perfectly. Use the heat gun as you did with the lighter to make sure that you get a bright silver and that'll ensure that you have a good joint. Okay, the last thing we're going to cover today is soldering. So many people don't like soldering. I didn't like soldering. I've come to be okay with it. So I've soldered a lot in this hobby. You will too. This is my favorite go-to gun, the Weller. It has a replaceable tip. It's very hot. Make sure you use it. Before you use it, check to make sure that it's hot enough by melting a piece of solder on it. And you can let that solder stay on there because you're going to use that when you put your wires together. Put your wires in your three hands, your third hand if you will. Lay them on top of each other. Make sure you did some flux. Again, this is all stuff from Amazon. And then literally just lay your solder gun on one side. The flux will get hot. Once the flux gets hot, the solder will melt perfectly and your wires are joined together. You have a perfect solder joint. It's now electrically functional, but you're going to need to waterproof it. So make sure you have some heat shrink, and I'll leave a link again where the heat shrink is. Just run it down over the joint and use your blowgun or your hot air gun and shrink the tubing around the wire, and we're done. So I hope this helps you in your hobby. We've covered many ways to put wires together. If you want to see anything else that we can show you about our journey through RGBs, please leave a comment and we'll do our best to get that video out for you. Thanks for watching.